Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And it is time once again for the FanDuel cash game lineup build here on rotogrinders.com. I am your host today, Mr. Dan Bach, DB730, and we're moving on to this week 6. And interesting discussions before the show. We're like, man, we do a cash game show, but man, looks like a really fun week for tournaments. But I don't think that means that there's going to be overlap in cash, Dean. I think it maybe means that cash might just be a little bit more challenging than we're particularly used to.
Yeah, well, it's always daunting to build a cash game lineup for NFL on Wednesday. Of course, information is yet to unfold. Lots of things are going to come out, but we kind of sort of are in the same general idea. We talked about basically, I guess we'll see, but you kind of have to pay up for running back and pay down at receiver. It's kind of sort of where we're at, but what happens when maybe we might have Starks get in the backfield to himself. We might have a guy like Giovanni Bernard get in the backfield to himself as far as injuries. So, this is Wednesday. Understand that things change, information change. This is the best cash lineup we can come up with on a given Wednesday.
Yeah, and we'll probably come up with a couple of different iterations of this lineup. Also joining us is the man known as Killa B, Brett Hartfield. Brett, ready to go this week 6?
I'm ready. Just go on to the topic of just lineup construction here. I just don't, when I first put together lineups, there wasn't something that really, there weren't a lot of must-haves in my lineup. So I feel like ownership's going to be pretty low, and there's not going to be as many chalky plays this week, which just lines up for a perfect tournament weekend. So, it should be interesting, but I'm looking forward to see what you guys have to say about certain players.
All right. Well, before we get into the build this week, do have to pass along some information on this show and the other cash and GPP shows that we do today and tomorrow. Starting next week, you are actually going to have these videos. They're going to be part of our incentives package for FanDuel and DraftKings appropriately. So if you're a FanDuel incentives member or premium member, you can find this in our daily research tools. If you're DraftKings, you'll be able to find the DraftKings ones in those tools. So this is the last week you're getting a freebie show of this one. I think the quality is very high on these, that they deserve to kind of go in there. So that's the direction that we're moving with them. As of now, the Friday afternoon lineup builder shows will remain free and live here on Roto-Grinders, but look for them to be posted on the same day that we're doing these shows currently. Obviously, just not going to be catching them live. They will be recorded and available for you to watch throughout the week. So certainly wanted to bring you up to date on that little bit of news. All right, let's get to the lineup build here as we move to week 6 here, fellas. And it's funny because the game I have spotlighted right now, Carolina versus New Orleans. Brett, we were talking before the show that some places don't have a line on this one, but you said you found one. What do we got on this?
Yeah, I got it at a 53 over under now. So, and Carolina is favored by 3. So favored by 3 in New Orleans. And it kind of stands out on an island by itself. Let me check the other over-unders. All the other over-unders are jam-packed between 43.5 and 47.5. So this one is almost, it's 5.5 points more than the second highest team or game. So yeah, this one's going to be one that you're going to want to have exposure to in cash games.
Yeah, Dean, and obviously the biggest question is who's going to be at quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. Derek Anderson looked awful this past week against Tampa Bay, but that line I think indicates a little bit that they're expecting Cam to play, and we've seen the Superdome basically turn into Coors Field version for the NFL and yield just tons of fantasy points. I think I saw they scored 40 points or 70 points combined, I think, in this matchup last year. So obviously this really looks like we're going to have quite a bit of fireworks here. But it's also two teams, though, outside of the quarterbacks. I don't know how many viable, really, cash game options we might have in these teams.
Well, Greg Olsen, too, of course.
But he's really expensive this week. He's like $8,100.
He's in my shell lineup, and that might be a mistake. I don't really know where to land a tight end, and I got something I want to talk about with you guys. But, yeah, okay, so Newton – I mean, the floor on Newton versus New Orleans is just absolutely silly. You talked about it last year, how that game shot out. It's going to shoot out again, 53 over under. I assume he's going to be back. It wasn't an injury. It's just that, he had the concussion, obviously, going through protocol now. And I can't imagine him not playing. The line certainly suggests it as far as a 53 over under. Last year in that, 2 games, of course, division opponent against New Orleans, 645 passing yards, 80 rushing yards. 8 total touchdowns, 1 on the ground. I really want to do my best to get Newton to my cash game. A Breeze, of course, you could pay down a little bit against Carolina. Carolina defense not the same as it was last year. A couple other names I think they're interesting. Hoyer is still $7K with Shore, I suppose, a nice value there. Ty God versus San Fran is certainly interesting. And, I mean, Kaepernick is just an amazing tournament play this week versus Buffalo. And then I love Buffalo as a defense as well. But I really want to try my absolute best to get Cam in my cash game lineup this week.
So, Brett, is it Cam over Breeze for you? I mean, we've seen the home road splits for Breeze, and, it's like a lock for 3 touchdowns and 300 yards for him. Cam, he's actually had a pretty down year so far. If you look at the numbers that he's put up this season, obviously last year was the MVP of the league, was week in, week out doing it both with his legs and his arm. But, this Carolina team's scrambling here a little bit, coming off the injury. Does that swing one way or the other for you in terms of cash games for those two?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because the way I look at these two quarterbacks, I feel like Drew Brees is the safest option. He's at home. You can lock him up for 3 touchdowns at home. You can lock him up for 300 yards, it seems like. Whereas Cam, it's like coming off a concussion, how much running is he going to do? Is he going to be the same Cam, or is he going to be a little bit more reserved? And the reason why Cam Newton has such a high floor is mainly because of his running. This isn't like a super potent pass offense. So if we're not going to see Cam of the old, if we're going to see more of a reserve Cam, I'm all in on Drew Brees and cash. And that's the thing. This is going to be kind of an unknown situation. But you would think like Cam doesn't want to get knocked out of any more games. So is he going to take less hits? Does that mean less running opportunity? I feel like you can't lose with Drew Brees in your lineup. He's also $400 cheaper here. So between the two, Drew Brees is my guy in cash right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you make a great case, and the running is what I think sets Cam apart. And with us having some uncertainty on exactly his style of play, I mean, there's already been whispers that he's got to change a little bit of the way that he is going to play the position, take less hits because of the value. I mean, we just saw it. You put Derek Anderson in there, and he couldn't do anything offensively. And I think that Newton realizes his value to this team and might change some things up just a little bit. And, all those rushing touchdowns that he had last year, man, that made a big difference. And if he's more conservative in that role, it's hard to pull the trigger, especially the first game back. It's one thing, it's one thing to see it for a couple of weeks and be like, okay, it's back to the same old Cam. But you got to think, Brett, this first week, there's going to definitely be some sort of something going through his head in terms of, tucking and running.
Yeah, and that's the main thing that I'm worried about. Will they even like just play call it totally different? So, when Cam's on the 1 yard line, 2 yard line, 3 yard line, you can expect a high percentage of the time that he's going to run the ball in. Well, now they might even take that out of his hands, just to try and get him less hits. You might just see him hand the ball off more often or, pass the ball in, which is obviously fine, but it's not like what we're used to with Cam. So just because of that, I feel like his touchdown equity goes down running the ball in, and then his rushing yardage equity goes down. I'm way more comfortable in Drew Brees. You can't miss with Brees at home. It's just one of the most ridiculous splits you'll see in the past 5 years. So
26 and 31 fantasy points for him in the 2 home starts for him this year. Let's get some other options, though, because we don't have to go there. I mean, I think they make fine options. Dean, you threw a couple of names out there. Tyrod Taylor at 7,800. I get it. San Francisco, questionable team. The defense for sure. But you could make the same argument for, Bortles against Chicago. That's a road game, bit tougher. But even Derek Carr against Kansas City, that team is been pretty bad defensively. We saw what happened with the Steelers 2 weeks ago, just absolutely dominated them. Those are a couple of guys who, I don't think are out of play here today. Take me through your middle tier and why you like Tyrod.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where you're at. I mean, and against San Francisco, we know we get the projection is 4 extra plays. As far as, you play against San Fran plays a little faster. I think it's about 24 seconds and change as far as time between each snap. And they don't exactly hold the ball very long either, necessarily, because they're not a very good offense. I think Buffalo probably turns them over a couple times, so Tyrod's got a short field to work with. and he can still, get a couple of cheap touchdowns or so here and there. And the legs, you got to love the legs as well. It's one of the reasons why I like Cam. I'm not completely sold that Cam's just not going to run the ball. I don't believe that. Instinct is instinct, and his instinct says I'm going to run the ball against New Orleans. It's too easy. So I would not be surprised if he still busts off a 20-yarder, if he runs in a 5-yarder. I'm not ready to scratch that off. And, of course, Breeze is perfectly fine. The problem here is that, Carr's a perfectly fine play. Tyrod's a perfectly fine play. It's just that it's not that much more to get to a guy like Breeze at 8,500. We're talking about, 1K. So, and you guys spoke as far as what a lock he seems to be at home against Carolina. Carolina defense not the same as they were last year. So, if I'm going to consider paying $7,900 for Carr, I'm going to get the Breeze at 8,500. So I can't see myself landing in the mid tier.
Brett, what do you think of Hoyer? I just had him up on screen. I've used him in cash 3 weeks in a row and wasn't disappointed at all. More than made value price per point comparative to other guys out there. I mean, not to say that my high end guys like DeAndre Hopkins 2 weeks ago, Odell Beckham last week, helped the cause with all that money savings I had, but clearly he's been getting it done there in Chicago, going against Jacksonville, who plays at a little decent tempo themselves. What do you think of him? 7K, up a little bit, but not in that territory where Dean's talking about, where you're right. 500 more, 600 more gets you Drew Brees.
Right. Yeah. So there's actually only 4 quarterbacks that I've been looking at, and Hoyer's one of them. So you have the Cam Newton and Drew Brees in that one game, and then Hoyer and Alex Smith. I actually have been siding with Alex Smith here, getting an Oakland defense at Oakland. I was impressed when the line came out that it's basically a pick'em game. Right at 23.5. And how you attack this Oakland is through the air. So I expect Alex Smith to have a really good game. He's $200 cheaper than Hoyer. FanDuel raised Hoyer's price finally up another $1,000. And it's a situation where, Jacksonville's been, somewhat steady, but defending the pass, but Oakland's just been brutally bad. So if I have to side with a cash game quarterback down here, I'm leaning towards Alex Smith.
Yeah, I think I disagree with you there. I think I'm on Hoyer over Smith. I mean, the 50 attempts, the 48 attempts we saw for him against Pittsburgh and San Diego were literally the ultimate game script for him, where they fell down very big and they had to play catch up, and he threw the ball all around the yard. And you're right about Oakland, and that line is interesting. And I love Smith for GPPs. I think Smith to Macklin is a fun GPP play. And especially if you look at Andy Reid's success coming up of bye weeks, he's actually done really well in that side of things. But Hoyer, they just seem committed to him, Dean, to move, he's moving the chains. He's actually got a good rapport with Jordan Howard. And obviously we saw Cam Meredith this past week. Which one is it for you if you were going to go low end?
Yeah, you said Andy Reid's come up a bye week. I think he spent his bye week at the presidential debate, right? Wasn't he? He was Ken Bone, right? All along the whole time. I don't look, it's one of those biases. I just don't really play Alex Smith. I don't know. It's just he's fine. It's probably not going to hurt you. The matchup's perfectly fine. The game can definitely shoot out. But I'm just not going to play him. I don't think I'm going to play him. I don't really have much analysis to give you. He's just somebody that's not going to crack my list, most likely.
So one thing I do want to throw out there is just the attempts this year for Kansas City has been ridiculous. So first game, 48 attempts, 37 attempts, 33 attempts, 50 attempts. So he's seen on average 8 or 9 more attempts than he did last year. So this is becoming more of a offense where they've been looking to run, looking to pass instead of run first. But, with Jamal Charles coming back into this offense, we'll see kind of what the breakdown comes, moving forward here off the bye.
All right, well, let's throw Breeze in there. I think we all feel pretty good about that play as our quarterback. And I want to move on to running back, and let's start with the biggest name on the board this week, Le'Veon Bell. I think he is a stone cold lock this week. When you consider what we saw Tennessee do to that defensive front last week, over 200 yards rushing, Bell is yet to find the end zone, but the guy is incredible. He's just got this insane floor with all the receptions. Murray's been great. We've got Thursday this week in terms of this. We'll probably kind of omit those players from this conversation. But I just think it's Le'Veon Bell far and away the top guy this week, and I want him for cash, Dean. What about you?
Is this me?
Yeah, that's you.
All right, I'm sorry, I didn't hear my name. Le'Veon, yeah. The thing is, like, the price is 9.3, and it's like, oh, that's really expensive. You're getting two players here. It's just two players. You're getting a running back. You're getting a receiver. Dude had 11 targets last week, 9 catches, 88 yards, and he had 20 carries as well. He's facing the Dolphins, who I don't know if they're the stone worst defense, but they're a stone disaster as a team just in general. And Levitan, I owe him like $10 or so with that, copywritten, of course. But look, like you said, he hasn't scored just yet, which has kind of kept his numbers down. But the floor is just amazing because the touches are there. The matchup is beautiful. I know they're not home, which you like to see, of course, the splits there for Roethlisberger. But, they split him out 5 wide. Sometimes, Le'Veon's going to catch 5 or 6 passes or so. And he's just an absolute – he's getting a ton of volume. He's in the best offense in football. And he's also, like, really, really talented. He's basically David Johnson, but maybe better.
Yeah, and I mean, he scored 20 fantasy points each of the last 2 games and has 0 touchdowns to show for it. Like, that trend is not going to continue, Brett.
Yeah, this is like a new package that we haven't seen Pittsburgh do in years past. So lining him up at wide receiver, which to me on FanDuel, it's still not a bad thing. It's just an easier way to get yardage racked up. I mean, he's a lock for over 100 yards, I think, almost every week. We just saw the Jets stuffed him running. So what do they end up doing? They just threw him out. I feel like he ran like 20-some routes. So you look at their top wide receiver, Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown only ran like 35 routes. So he's running almost as many routes as their top wide receiver at this point. And, there's just no way that a defense is going to lock him down because if it's a strong rush D, then they'll just put him at wide receiver. So, yeah, touchdowns will be coming. Miami, this is definitely a spot where he should be favored for at least a touchdown, if not 2. So, yeah, I mean, I'm all for putting him in the lineup.
Well, let's do our weekly argument here. Antonio Brown or Le'Veon Bell. I think on DraftKings this week, it's slam dunk, go with Le'Veon Bell. It's a $10K price tag on Brown over there versus I think it's like upper 7s or low 8s. Like it's a very big difference between those two. But on FanDuel, we're at 9,700 for Brown versus 93 for Bell. It's pretty close in terms of, salary. Does that change anything for you, Dean? I mean, I love Brown too this week. And we saw AJ Green, what he did to this Dolphins defense not that long ago. And, you're crazy. Now, after that game, I said to myself, well, I'm definitely going to be playing Antonio Brown versus this defense. And now here we are, and I'm thinking I might go Le'Veon Bell instead. What do you think?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I think the pivots are probably better at running back. It's just so stacked. So, like, you don't necessarily need Le'Veon. If you don't have DeMarco Murray at home versus Cleveland, that's an amazing spot. LaShawn McCoy, we'll get to in a second, against San Francisco at home. Is just an awesome spot. Jordan Howard against Jacksonville, perfectly fine with that. I know Jacksonville's been a better defense than the numbers might suggest. Lamar Miller versus Indy at 7-9. Like, Lamar Miller is going to be like 10% owned, if not lower, and that's an amazing spot. But there's just so many good spots. So running backs this week, I talked about spending down a guy like Gio Bernard, who got 53 of 70 snaps last time out. The game script's probably going to go in his favor against New England, and he's ridiculously cheap. And if Hill doesn't play for whatever reason, he's interesting. And talk about Starks can be a cheapie if for whatever reason that Eddie Lacy doesn't give it a go. It's running back is absolutely stacked, and receiver, it's like, well, I don't really know if there's anybody I actually feel amazing about. It's certainly not the same quality as far as options, but for me, I think there's plenty of spots to just save money at receiver. There's plenty of darts that are worth a look that are well positioned, that are guys that are maybe 5, 6K or so, and just the lineup build is kind of putting me on Le'Veon. Antonio's going to be awesome in a vacuum, but I as of right now, I'm leaning towards playing Bell over Brown, and of course you can play them both in a tournament for sure.
Yeah, and maybe what we'll do today is we'll build one Bell team and one Brown team because you really can't go wrong with that. And I think this week it's a bit harder to get them together in cash. You might be able to do it if you use a Brian Hoyer or an Alex Smith, but I don't necessarily even think that's necessary this week. So let's, for the purposes of this lineup build, we'll go with Le'Veon Bell here as our running back. And let's get to wide receiver. And there's one guy for me that stands out, stone cold, put him in your lineup, and that's Jarvis Landry here against Pittsburgh. at a depressed price at 6,900. Dean, you gave me the what are you serious about? And I realized Jarvis Landry coming off a week which, things did not work out well. Only 3 targets. But we also saw last week Brandon Marshall go off. This is going to be a high-tempo, fast-paced game. He had double-digit targets 3 or 4 games in a row before that. I think they go back to him again here. And at under 7K, you're getting the top receiver in a shootout who typically gets, huge market share. Talk me off it, Dean, because you didn't like that pick.
No, it's fine. Well, I just thought you were going to go Cam Meredith. I just thought he was like the first one that was just kind of sneaking there at 5'4". He makes a lot of things work. With White out, Meredith saw a ton of share. I mean, when Royal was announced in last week and people panicked, and I'll fess up, I was one of them, and it was just stupid because if you listen to – we'll give Levitan another shout out. He was talking about basically how when Royal was out there with Meredith played every single snap after White went out. So that was my bad. That was my mistake. And, again, Jacksonville defense not as bad as we think if you look at the DVOA. But I thought Meredith would be the first guy. I'm fine with Landry. I expect Miami's going to be playing some catch-up mode. Tannehill's just not very good. But you'd imagine that Landry's going to get some garbage time work. Maybe he'll play the role of Brandon Marshall or so. And, it's a funnel defense there in Pittsburgh, right? Miami's run offense is not very good. So you'd imagine Landry will get some looks and some options. And that price is somewhat suppressed. Of course, I like him more on DK where, you're getting paid 1 point per catch, and that's kind of Landry's game. His game is not a dot. But, the price is fine. The matchup should be okay. So I'm not going to talk you off it. I was just surprised that you didn't say Meredith first.
Well, Brett, what do you think?
Yeah, I loved Landry. Actually, Landry was the first guy I had in my cash game also. So if you wrap around from last year, I believe it was 9 straight games in a row with at least 10 targets. So this guy is just a target monster. And let's really put his bad game on Tannehill's shoulders last week. I don't think he deserves any of that. But, coming home against the Pittsburgh defense where obviously Pittsburgh is going to be favored, by a touchdown in this game. So, Miami should be passing the ball here a lot in catch-up mode. So, love Landry getting catches underneath here. I don't see how he doesn't get at least 12 targets in this game.
Yeah, 30th versus the pass, it looks like, according to the FanDuel rankings. I'm assuming that's via number fire metrics as well. That seems about right. A decent versus the run versus the pass, not so much this year. Well, let's get down to Dean's stone cold lock. And obviously last week he had an incredible game. We're talking about Cam Meredith. Brett, Dean laid it out why he likes him so much. He's 5,400 this week against Jacksonville. Team who's been pretty good versus, defensively, I think they're actually, I'll say good, but they're better maybe than people think. But 9 for 130, a touchdown, 12 targets, 22 fantasy points last week at what stone cold minimum or darn close to it, Adam Levitan. And what do we do? Is he cash game this week, or do you think that teams will scheme differently and say, hey, boy, this is the apple of Hoyer's eye. We're going to slide coverage to his side. What's your take?
Yeah. So, I guess I don't remember years like this where a wide receiver just jumps into a role and all of a sudden gets 12 targets. It's like normally when wide receivers jump in a role, it's like they're still like the second or third, tier option in the pass offense. But it seems like the Kevin White role, that's getting a lot of targets in this offense. So they definitely, it's like almost the way the Bears must scheme their pass plays. So at this price, 5,400, I don't see why he wouldn't be cash game unless you don't want to roll with a guy that, is still playing or starting his second game of his career. But I do agree, like out of all the guys that kind of have just emerged into a role, like Sammy Coates, in the Martavis Bryant role, he's definitely not cash game viable. He's got the deep A dots, and he's just out of all the targets, like I don't see him catching more than like 50% of the ball. So way more comfortable with the Cameron Meredith in a cash game.
Yeah, I know we don't do the tournament build, but just a quick tournament analysis here is I'm fine fading him in tournaments or being way underweight on him in tournaments here this week, because I actually think Michael Thomas at that same price is going to be an excellent pivot who could easily, double him in production this week at, a third of the ownership of what he has. So I think there's actually a lot of tournament pivots to go to, but obviously in cash games, we don't really care about that. And based on volume alone, Meredith last week was incredible. Thomas, he's starting to become getting more of a presence. You saw the last week 9 targets, 11 the game before that, but also relied on touchdowns and scores to really make his value there at the end of the day. Where Meredith didn't really need to do that. He got so much work yardage wise that he made it just fine. So I like Thomas as a great tournament pivot, but I kind of again maybe we just go with the chalk here, Dean, and beat people at other spots. I'm not like necessarily sold like Meredith's going to do anything close to what we did last week. But I don't want to get beat by him because then I'll kind of like really feel like an ass.
Well, he doesn't need to do that. I mean, you're looking for maybe like 12 to 15 points or so, something like that. And again, you're kind of rostering Meredith because you want to get in guys like Bell and Breeze and pieces like that you really want to pay up for. You mentioned Thomas, like he said, 20 targets the last 2 weeks. I think he's kind of sort of cash game playable. And I was hitting before. I was kind of talking about. I think there's a lot of cheap pivots at receiver that are worth a look, and they're possibly cash game playable. Coates at 6'4". I think he's going to be in a lot of cash game lineups. I don't know if he should be because he's definitely a volatile guy. Did Sammy Coates have a good game last week? Like, did somebody say good game to Sammy Coates? Because I know it was a nice box score. We've seen it before at Mike Evans before. Mike Evans has like 37 targets, 17 drops, and like 2 touchdowns, 120 yards. Good game? I don't know. And I also
think he gets the good game. I know he dropped a lot, but he did still score 2. So yeah.
Well, and Dean, like he's so fast, he's getting open, right? So his downside is not having hands. It's very similar to Will Fuller. Will Fuller like catches a lot of his balls with his body, so he's going to have plenty of drops throughout his career too. So these guys are fast enough, and they're working on usually just a cornerback straight up. They don't have safety help because Pittsburgh offense, you're going to be gearing your defense for a bunch of other people. You're not going to be thinking of Sammy Coates. So deal with it. But if he's got that much speed where he's getting open, he's still going to get targets.
Yeah, 11 targets and 8 the last 2 games, by the way. I don't know how consistent that's going to be, but it's certainly interesting to monitor. And also, you mentioned his hands. Well, he's got a sizable cast in his left hand. I don't know if that's going to hurt him or help him, but just something to monitor this week.
My favorite wide receiver hands moment?
Which one is that?
Freddie Mitchell. I want to thank my hands. Like, I think like we need to there are probably people here watching the show so young, like don't even remember Freddie Mitchell. Like you guys certainly do. And so, I think the entertainment factor from Freddie Mitchell was absolutely off the charts and totally underappreciated.
Do you guys remember it was like 4th down and 27? I want to say Freddie Mitchell caught a pass against the Packers in the playoffs.
Exactly.
It was a really ridiculous pass. I don't know. Right when you said Freddie Mitchell, that came to mind. And it was like one of those things where game's over if he doesn't convert that. And it was amazing pass, amazing catch, Philly.
Like, I'm pretty sure he came into the post-game press conference with oven mitts on his hand. That's just so good. All right, well, let's keep moving here. We're at 59.80. We plugged Meredith in this lineup build here today. I think we're all okay with that. Brett, let's go ahead and hit up defense kicker, get these ones out of the way. Sure. I think defense is kind of interesting, Brett. We've got Broncos on the road, Pittsburgh on the road is kind of the high dollar ones that I'm not really that interested in. I kind of prefer home teams. I know you don't have to. I think some of the metrics have shown you can take road defenses, but I think Seahawks coming off a bye week is really interesting. Atlanta, they are staying out west, so don't read too much into, extended travel. They're staying out on the West Coast this week.
Special.
After the game in Denver. Siege. Don't you call it the Siege Special?
Yeah.
Okay. Bills against San Francisco, another team at 4,800. And then there's plenty of, potential other plays here for us as well. I'll give you my sneaky one. I would never play him in cash, but I think Dak is going to have his first bad game against Green Bay this week on the road. So I think you might have some turnover upside there with the Packers. But take me through your cash game options, Brett.
All right, yeah, I'll just give you the one defense you should be having, and that's the Buffalo Bills. There should be no other defense that you look at this week. It's very easy. I think you got maybe a different slate up because Arizona's not involved. in the main slate. So
yeah, this is the Thursday, Monday, which we're kind of ignoring those games. So.
Sure. But yet, like, the Bills defense has been pretty phenomenal. And they were on the road the last 2 weeks, and they look good. I mean, they went to New England, gave up no points there, just shut down the Patriots. It wasn't obviously the Patriots that we see now. But then on the road against the Rams, they looked phenomenal. They're getting pressure. They're getting turnovers, over 2 turnovers a game, 3 touchdowns in 5 games. This is the defense you want at home versus Colin Kaepernick. I know the last report I heard on Colin Kaepernick, and I've heard different reports of why he's not playing, whether it be a contract issue, but also he was kind of hurt in the preseason. He's like 20 pounds underweight, so I don't know what type of Colin Kaepernick we're going to see. But I assume there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of potential for sacks and turnovers. So.
Yeah, and he couldn't beat out Blaine Gabbert, so that's all you need really.
And this is a West Coast to East Coast game, so everything's pointing to play Buffalo.
I'm with you, Dean. You're Sir Chalk-a-lot here, so
yeah.
I mean that seems like the play, right?
Yeah, that is where I was at in my shell lineup. I just couldn't get to them, so I think my favorite cheapie is probably Houston versus Indy, just because. No team has been sacked more this year than Indianapolis. 20 sacks so far he's given up. We know that line is pretty terrible. They've given up 3 more sacks than any other team in the league. And Houston, I think, is going to get 3 or 4 sacks. And sacks, I mean, it's a hard metric to predict, but you can kind of sort of position 3 or 4 sacks or so. And luck every once in a while turns it over. And I'm just looking for the cheapies as far as cheap defenses. And there's so many that just are in terrible spots. And if you can't get the Buffalo, but by all means, do your absolute best to get the Buffalo cash for all those reasons. I still think the Kaepernick's interesting for tournaments just because of the read option. We saw Gabbert have 22 rushes the last 2 weeks. 22 rushes for Gabbert. I'd imagine that's not going to go down for Kaepernick, and we love quarterbacks with wheels. So I'm going to have some cap and GPP, but definitely Buffalo defense. For me, it's not even a conversation. It's the best one.
Yeah, I actually think Houston's a pretty good name to throw out there. You're right about the sacks. Last week, I think Jacksonville had 6. And they don't really have really good pass rushers there at all. So if they're able to get pressure, a team like Houston at home should probably be able to do it as well. All right, well, you know how I work with the kickers here. Hopefully I had Adam Vinatieri last week. He had only 22 FanDuel points. Kickers, just get rid of them. But in the meantime, we're going to plug in. I usually go 46, 47. And, we'll go with the old defense kicker correlation there, and we'll throw Dan Carpenter in at 4,700. So that leaves us 6,800 bucks left, 3 spots, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Where we want to go, Dean?
I love the idea of doubling down on elite running backs. We love Le'Veon Bell, and it's so weird because DeMarco Murray is a guy that's been kind of ignored all season long. At least I probably have not played him enough. I've mentioned him, but he's always just come up short to crack my lineups. And he's probably going to just come up short once again just because the spot for LaShawn McCoy against San Francisco in a revenge game against Chip Kelly, and McCoy has looked revived. He's looked awesome. Game script's in his favor. We talked about that San Fran team going from west to east. I think it's an amazing spot for McCoy, and $600 savings against Murray. I think Murray comes up third in the Bell, Murray, McCoy conversation. That's why I think a guy like Lamar Miller, who's also in a really good spot against Indy, is going to be mostly ignored, and he probably shouldn't be, but that's just kind of the nature of the slate. And Ezekiel, nobody's going to have Zeke at 8-1. It's just, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Sure, he's awesome and all that kind of stuff, but I think McCoy, I want to try to double down on elite running backs, get Bell and McCoy, just kind of figure it out from there.
Okay, McCoy, not typically in years past, Brett looked as too much of a cash game option, but has looked like a different running back this year. Big game last week on the road against the Rams. Obviously gets some revenge against Chip Kelly, who he did not like and let it be known. But, man, 8,200, that, just to give you an idea, that leaves us at 6,100 bucks, a spot left for wide receiver and tight end. I'm okay with it. I probably agree with you that I like him better than DeMarco Murray because that game, even though Murray's going to get his usage, I'm just worried about the pace of that one, Brett. I just feel like if there's going to be a 16 to 10 game, that's the one that's going to be this week. And
can I just jump in? I don't mean to take your spot, but one more thing I wanted to mention. Adam Pfeiffer tweet. Last 4 weeks, running backs versus San Francisco. Fozzie, the Fozzie Bear, Fozzie Whittaker, 16 carries, 100 yards. C-Mike, 20 carries, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns. Zeke, 23 for 138 and a touchdown. Duke Johnson, 27 for 157 and 2 touchdowns. McCoy's going to beast. And, like, Gillislee's not stealing it. If it's a 1 yard, they're on the 1. Gillislee's not in there. McCoy will not come off the field at the 1. That's not happening. He's going to get his touchdown against Chip.
Okay, Brett, your floor on the second running back.
I have LaShawn McCoy as the highest own for me in cash games right now. So love LaShawn McCoy. Didn't even think about the narrative, but the narrative should be pretty strong the way he left Philly. San Francisco is going to give him more play calls. When you're looking at the amount of touches in comparison to the running backs around him, he's usually a little bit less. But I just feel like this is just such a great position. San Fran going West Coast to East Coast. Buffalo favored by over a touchdown. He's going to get a lot of touches, and the narrative kind of put the cherry on the top for me. I didn't even think about it, but yeah, just everything. There's really nothing negative I think to take out of this situation. And there's still question marks for other guys like Lamar Miller. Just hasn't really looked effective this year. But I mean, in another great situation, home against Indy. Kind of been going back and forth between those two, but I've been sticking with McCoy.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Miller. The thing I like about Indy, and maybe we'll get to this in some receivers potentially, is they went no huddle last week, and they went no huddle more than they've gone all season long. I think they've come to the realization our line sucks. The only thing we're going to do is to run at pace against tired defenses. Kind of worked a little bit versus Chicago. So I think we're going to see an uptick in plays there in that game once again, since they did pretty well. But the other, Miller, I'm okay with. Even Jordan Howard against Jacksonville. Let's not act like you can't run against that team. Frank Gore a couple of weeks ago put up some really good numbers against Jacksonville. And Jordan Howard has been a stud, Dean. I mean, yeah, it's 7,700, but, what complaints can we have when you look at what he's done the last couple of weeks? 16 for 118, 23 for 111, and 3 receptions in each of those 2 games. And that doesn't even count the Dallas game where his yards per carry were tremendous as well. I mean, Jordan Howard looks legit.
Yeah, sure. He's perfectly fine, but he's $500. We're not getting Jordan Howard at 6K or 5.5 or 6.5. He's $500 less than McCoy. Like, I'm finding that $500. That's it. Simple as that.
You are buying in all in on McCoy this week.
It's just when you're comparative shopping, independent of nothing else, Howard just by himself is a perfectly fine play. I'll take the $500. I'll find $500, and frankly, I don't think the mid-tier receiver is like amazing, and I think you can find 5.5 and 6K guys that are basically just as good as the 7K guys. So I'd rather just delegate my funds to running back and just kind of figure out a receiver.
Yeah, I think a lot of those middle tier guys are going to be fun for tournaments. I hate Todd Gurley this week. Haloti Ngata out for Detroit, so looks like he's going to miss the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm telling you, the Gurley man is going to have that monster game sooner or later. He's going to break one. Dean. I'm telling you.
Okay, but don't play him in your cash games. This is the Odell Beckham play of the week. It's the Odell Beckham special right here.
Hey, I talked you into it because you played him in a few years.
There was so much value that opened up. He did sprinkle in a little bit of cash games just because begrudgingly I clicked his name.
But I won't push like I did last week on Beckham. Let's get to tight end, wide receiver. I think we're at 6,100 apiece, so that's going to take out Gronk, Olsen, Reed. Those guys, I think, pretty much out of the equation, at least for me. I mean, I don't think if we even use Greg Olsen for Dean, that leaves us at 4,100. We can't even make it work. So those top tier guys are out of the equation. And I don't think this is a week we need to do that, Brett. I mean, I just don't see the reason in cash with tighter salaries on FanDuel this week to pay up for those guys. Fine in GPPs because we've seen, and last week was a perfect example of it. You get that tight end who goes crazy for 3 touchdowns and 30 fantasy points. That's a huge edge over the rest of the field if nobody else, comes close to that. And Martellus kind of supplied that. But in cash games, I don't see the upside in paying those price tags.
Right. And, looking down at like the tight ends, like for value tight ends, I've kind of been just looking at the 5,400, 5,600 range. You have Pitta, Ertz, and Fleener that I've kind of been eyeing up. And normally what I'll do is just look at what's kind of changed in the situation. We got news in last night or this morning that Steve Smith's not going to be playing. So I just feel like there's going to be just that many more targets to Dennis Pitta. Now, I don't feel like his touchdown equity is that high. So, there's that. But going up against the Giants defense where you used to the first few games, you could attack the Giants defense in the slot and with tight end. I still feel like that's the way to beat the Giants is with their linebacker core. But Ertz is probably the most talented down here. In fact, I would almost say like Ertz for me is like a top 5 talented tight end. But I think Pitta's the cash game play for me. I just feel like his targets should be somewhere around 10 targets this week.
Dean, I think he makes a good case with Pitta, especially with Steve Smith out, because it doesn't suddenly mean like Kamar Aiken's going to step in and get all these looks or anything in that offense. And the targets have been there. Ertz is all right. I mean, he ran a lot of routes last week, didn't get a lot of looks on those routes that he did run, but that was as premier of a matchup as you can get against Detroit, and it didn't really materialize. And kind of like I talked about before, Philadelphia's grinded out team. They don't play fast.
I just like the idea of Dennis Pitta using his athleticism somehow. Is that what I heard? Like he's got like a hip and a half, if that. Maybe I'm rounding up.
I didn't give him any athleticism remarks, that's for sure.
Well, like, I know the linebacking core for the Giants, and people talk about how it's slow, and I guess that's what we're expecting for Pitta. He's maybe I have an old man bias here, but if I'm gonna dig in the spot, I'm probably gonna land on Fleener. I know. I just want to get another share of that high-scoring offense
because he never disappoints. Like, I mean, he's as safe of a cash game guy as we could find, right, Dean?
Ever since he shaved his hair off and donated to charity. Well, actually, he had a bad game.
I was going to say he was terrible last game. I know. I rostered him 3 for 19. He's had one good game without the hair. That narrative doesn't work, Dean.
Okay, so I don't really like this spot. And that's kind of where in my shell lineup, I went to Olsen. And, of course, I'm punting basically all 3 receivers. But I think you can kind of meet in the middle and go with Walker at 6'7". And I think there's a handful of receivers at 5'5"-ish that are in play for cash.
Yeah, I don't mind Delaney Walker. I think we saw last week he got more involved in the offense. I actually used him in cash and worked out just fine, with the touchdown and everything. And then we also, we've got Bennett last week who got all the targets, and he's still only 6,600. I think he's going to have really high ownership in cash games this week. I think a lot of people are going to chase it. And typically I'm not a chaser like that, because the likelihood of him to get 3 touchdowns again isn't great. But we also know that we've seen this offense function with 2 really good tight ends when Aaron Hernandez was around with Gronk several years back before he allegedly shot somebody and is in prison. But Bennett kind of fits that mold way better than any other second tight end they've ever had next to Gronk. And he's only at 6,600. And then Travis Kelce as well against Oakland. We talked about that game potentially being back and forth at 6,400. I think there's a lot of different ways to go here. So I don't know what our consensus is going to be here.
Well, we can do like a 2 for 2 here. So let's just do.
We'll put Pitta in right now, and then we'll see what we got.
So with Pitta, I would go to Jeremy Maclin as my third wide receiver. Again, if Alex Smith is like a target of mine in cash games, and it's gonna have to be Maclin as his main guy. Oakland's been terrible defending wide receivers on the year. Just shapes up really well. It is a pick'em game, but shapes up really well for Maclin to get more than 10 plus targets here. So yeah, I love Maclin in the spot.
I am not against Jeremy Maclin at all this week. It always gets you a little queasy taking a wide receiver from the Chiefs in cash, just because remember they had that long stretch before last season where nobody was scoring touchdowns. And you hate to see it revert back to that, but you're right. Oakland's been so dreadful, but I think you could still even make an argument for Will Fuller against Indy. For the reasons that, I spoke about before in terms of the pace of this game and the fact that, you're going to see Indy play with tempo. And certainly if they have any success on offense, we've seen Osweiler be feel a little bit better at home and coming off, literally the toughest matchup in football last week against Minnesota. He and Fuller, a little bit nerve-wracking in cash, but I think you could make the argument for either of those two guys. And you're probably wondering, you're 100 short, Dan. No, I'm not, because that's why I give myself a little extra room with Dan Carpenter and kicker, and we could move down there. Now, Dean, let's go to your 2v2. And we'll throw Delaney Walker in there because he's the one that you wanted to roll with. He's sitting at 6,700, and that leaves us at 5,500 at wide receiver. Who would you be your two?
I think it's Mike Thomas, right? Mike Thomas at what is he? 5'5"?
5'4", I believe he is.
5'4", yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can move up a kicker if you want to. If there's somebody like at 4'8", obviously. I think I'm just curious to get just kind of gauge your thoughts in general. Robert Woods is 5'5". San Francisco 32nd in the league against number one wide receivers as far as DVOA. Yes, Robert Woods is the number one receiver for Buffalo. I know it doesn't make any sense, but I don't hate him as far as the price. I know he disappointed us last week, but I think it's a good bounce back spot for him. Curley's 5'8". I guess we're $100 short of Curley. We know Cam Merritt already are lined up at 5'4", but that's kind of where I'm digging. And also, I feel like this is a Tavon Austin. I never played Tavon Austin, but I kind of like Tavon Austin back in the dome. I like the wheels in the dome.
I've heard you're the second person I hear say that. I am praying that we get some tout steam on Tavon Austin this week. Really,
you can't take him in cash, can you?
Zero chance.
He's gonna catch like 7 screens. And he's gonna bust one for like 70 yards.
I don't think you can rely on 7 catches at all. No way. You can probably rely on 7 touches, but if you include punts too,
Can handoffs. He gets the occasional handoff.
Yeah.
Reverse.
Robert, I'll give you Woods though. I think it's a legit argument, Woods v. Thomas for that spot. Now let's just talk about roster build. We've got McCoy here, Brett. You get McCoy, you get Woods. They do have, in theory, other options who can score touchdowns, but I feel like you're covering your TDs pretty good against one of the worst defenses out there if you've got both those guys together.
Yeah, I don't know how much, touchdown equity Robert Woods would have, but I agree you're getting a lot of focal point to that offense, right? Because, Woods has been a guy that's been featured in this offense. There really hasn't been a second wide receiver that's kind of stepped up. And then Clay's kind of just been there. He really hasn't been featured too much either, I don't think. Here, I'm going to look at Clay's. He's only had 5-7 targets. He's definitely the number one in this offense when it comes to pass receptions. And like Dean said, San Fran is the worst against number one wide receivers. So I would probably still lean to get some more exposure to that New Orleans-Carolina game, because you look at our roster right now, we have no Carolina. And in fact, pre-show, when I was looking at how can I get Carolina, it seemed like the only thing that I could do was put in Cam Newton. So it's tough to fade the team that's in the highest scoring game, supposed to score the most points on the week. So I feel like the only way to get Carolina exposure would probably be rostering Cam.
All right, well, I don't feel like this is a bad lineup here at all. Let's make a couple of tweaks, though. We got a little bit of time left, and what we'll do on this one is we'll put Cam in there because, we kind of want to do a Cam lineup as well. And let's take out Le'Veon Bell, and we'll throw in Antonio Brown. Or we might want to go there. Now that leaves us 4,700. And Dean, you mentioned a little bit earlier, James Starks. Brett, what are you? You're the Packers guy here. Starks, he hasn't really done a whole lot this year, but what's the running back situation there? Last week did get 12 carries and 6 targets. Do they have anybody else in that backfield besides him?
Yeah, not that I know of, not that I've seen. So, I want to get more reports. Probably wait until a beat writer comes out with something more official here. But if I had to give an over under on how many touches Starks gets, it's like 15. But remember, he had a really big role last year when Eddie Lacy was fat Eddie Lacy, and this year he hasn't looked like himself, but. It seems like he's going to be forced into a role, whether he likes it or not. it's not a good spot. Dallas going to be running pretty slow, but, still expect Green Bay to score some points. He should have some red zone touches here if he's the main guy. So, I don't know if I want to punt, but he's definitely going to have some ownership on him in both cash and tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously only if Lacy is out, Dean. But last week a lot of people went to DeAndre Washington, and maybe we should have looked twice at that when that report came out that it was a true split in terms of what these guys were going to do. I don't think we're going to have that because, like Brett said, I don't see where else they could possibly go in terms of ground game, and he still does do a lot in the receiving game. I think this is a much better play than DeAndre Washington last week, assuming Lacy is officially out.
Well, as for Washington was fine. He got like 14 touches or so against a really weak defense. He even got a goal line carry like around the 3 or so, and he got vultured. He was in there on the 1, but the fullback took his carry. So
but that's going to happen when you're like 5'9" or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, I just like the fact he was in the game. But sure, noted. The issue, of course, here is opportunity cost, right? Because we keep talking about how many awesome running backs there are. Bell, Murray, McCoy, Miller, Howard. 2 of those are going to get at least 20, if not 25 fantasy points. Is Starks going to get 25? Probably not. Could he hit value? Could he get like what is value these days on FanDuel? Some people say it's 2x, and you want to shoot for 120.
Could he get you 12 fantasy points? Would you take 12 fantasy points?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Now you have to find a way to make up those 12 and 12 more for your receiver and Antonio Brown. So can Antonio Brown get 12 more than Thomas, than Curley, than Woods? Of course.
Yes.
So that's kind of the question you're kind of pressed to and of course you can just find 2 guys in the mid tier, right? You can play a guy. You don't have to go all the way down to Starks. You don't have to go all the way up to Brown. But I think in a vacuum, Starks could be perfectly fine to get you 12 fantasy points, but I don't know if that's enough.
And I think it's like an opportunity cost, right, of just rostering another running back. There are so many running backs in great situations, whereas I've been having a way more of a narrow focal point when it comes to wide receivers. So it's once you put him in there, you're giving up all the 25-plus point days that are going to happen between the elite running backs. So another guy that I know we haven't talked about is Mark Ingram. It seems like he's at a tier kind of by himself at 6,700 and it seems like he's also got his rollback that he had last year. He's had 13 targets now the last 2 weeks. So he's now touching the ball 20 plus times the last 2 weeks. Actually, he had 19 and then 24 touches. So, but in a game that we project as the highest scoring game, he should have plenty of red zone opportunity. And, he's a couple thousand cheaper than the guys that we've been looking at the elite level. So I do like him also.
And of course, we just saw Jaquiz Rogers go for 30 touches in a game. What happened? How did that even happen?
Yeah, he's like 5'7".
I had no idea he had a 30 rush capability. I thought the most rushes that he could possibly have is 15.
I think they signed him 2 weeks ago. Amazing. Yeah. But if anything, that just lends us to maybe consider Mark Ingram a little bit more. But there you go. That's going to do it in terms of our lineup builds. Kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse into what we are doing here this week on FanDuel. But do know that there's a little bit later today, you got the DraftKings GPP build, I think around 2:30. And then we've got 3 hours of live NFL talk tonight on Grinders Live, kicking off at 7 o'clock, I believe. So definitely stay tuned for that. Remember,
hockey as well, Dan.
What's that? Oh, hockey. You're right. Pepsi would be very upset if I didn't talk about that.
All the Connor McJesus.
Exactly. So that gets rolling at 5:30 today. So that's in the primetime spot. Do remember, you can find these videos starting next week in the incentives package. So if you really enjoy them, you should subscribe to it. You can do it on a monthly basis or a season-long basis. And we think it can help you become better players. And hopefully you enjoy what we're doing here on these roundtable shows. Brett, you're back tonight with the first look. I'm back tonight on the football guys, making an ass out of myself because I lost. So you're not going to want to miss that. That's going to be brutal.
What's the punishment tonight?
Well, let's just put it this way. If you know the Broadway musical Hamilton, then you'll really appreciate what I'm going to do today.
All right.
So
wait another audience, Dan. It's like 3 people.
I know. That's exactly why I'm doing it. So nobody gets to go.
Yeah, isn't it like $2,000 a ticket out in New York? Like,
hey, just download it for $15 on iTunes. It's actually good music. So, but again, thank you so much for tuning us in. If you ever got questions, feel free to find us over there on Twitter. Send us a question, and we're usually happy to answer them. Great job by Devin and Simon putting this show together behind the scenes. And as always, we'll catch you next week over there on the incentives with our FanDuel lineup build. Dean, next week you need to wear the white tie under the red shirt. Okay.
Lock it in.
All right, guys. For Dean and Brett, I'm Dan. Have yourself a great week, and we will see you.